moving further down, I actually want to throw a question at you because I sent you
Yeah.
that interview I did with Dr. Douglas London.
Yeah.
Just so your listeners know, this is a fantastic researcher who's down in Ecuador right now studying one of the last remaining indigenous hunter-gatherer societies in the world. And he's looking at their diet. And in that interview, you saw where he completely agrees with you is he says they actually avoid most vegetables, particularly stems and leaves, because of the anti-nutrient content. They won't eat those things unless they have to, even though they're in the jungle. Those things are readily available. What he found was this hunter-gatherer society ate a lot of fruit, ate a lot of meat. And I was wondering what your response was to that.
No, I thought it was so fascinating. And that's essentially, if we skip ahead, that's essentially how I would draw the plant toxicity spectrum with an asterisk around fructose and how we feel about higher levels of fructose. And so we can get into that. But I definitely think that if we are looking at plants, the least toxic part of plants, at least from an anti-nutrient perspective, rather than a sugar molecule, if we just put fructose, put fructose versus glucose aside, from an anti-nutrient perspective, the fruit of plants, I think is much less likely to have anti-nutrients. In fact, usually has very few. There are some fruits that are poisonous, but very rarely. And in the plant toxicity spectrum that I draw in the book, which is called the Carnivore Code, I'll have to get you guys a copy. I think of the non-sweet fruits, things like squash, avocado, olives, and berries as the least toxic plant foods. And slightly, moving a little bit further toward the toxicity side, the more sweet, kind of hybridized, sugary fruits are less desirable. But I would think of the non-sweet fruits as the least toxic plant foods based on individual sensitivities. One interesting anecdote I'll share quickly, and then I'll throw it back to you guys, is that I did a couple of carbohydrate reintroduction experiments. So I've been eating a strictly nose to tail carnivore diet for the last year and a half plus. And, I was I always want to be an experimenter. And so I thought, well, let me introduce just one thing. I'm going to introduce egg corn squash because I was curious, is my gym performance going to change? Am I going to feel differently? Is my body composition going to change? What's going to happen? And my eczema, which was pretty severe prior to going carnivore, came back within 5 days. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. And of course it's just N of one, but it's me thinking egg corn squash triggered eczema for me. That was the reason that I went carnivore in the first place, was that even on a pretty strict, organic, autoimmune paleo diet, my eczema persisted. And so removing all plant foods was quite helpful for me in many ways that I've talked about on previous podcasts, but reintroducing squash triggered me a little bit. So I thought, oh, that's strange. So I cut it out. The eczema went back away. So I think of those non-sweet fruits, and we don't traditionally think of avocado as a fruit, but it is, and squash as a fruit. Those non-sweet fruits, I would think of, my hypothesis, those are probably less toxic to humans. So I think this is quite fascinating that this tribe, there was the Waorani, and there was another tribe you sent me in that paper.
So the particular, the Waorani, and I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation here, is kind of the broader tribe, and the particular, I don't know, sect or what, I don't know how you would describe it, but the particular group he was working with was the Kauai-Mano.
And do you know what kind of fruit? I love the details. I wonder what the fruit in the Amazon looks like. It's equatorial, so maybe it is a pretty juicy, luscious type of fruit.
Well, one of the things he brought up is they eat a huge variety of fruit. And he compared it to the Western diet, where he said, if you go to the supermarket and buy the fruit, you have about 10 things to select from. He said they had over 70 different fruits that they ate.
Is that throughout the year or at any one time?
Yeah, that's what's fascinating. He said, this is the rainforest. These fruits are available all year round. You can eat them at any time.
Yeah.
But they would only eat particular fruits at particular times a year.
Huh. And wasn't that also, Trevor, based on he says they can literally sense the phytonutrient content of foods, and they literally reject foods that they know could be.
Yeah. They have over 30 different words to describe the phytochemical taste of foods.
That was fascinating. Did he say anything about the macronutrient ratios? Because if they're eating meat and fruit, how much of their diet is from fruit? Do you have any sense of that?
I don't have it in front of me, and I should have pulled it up before we came here.
I looked at the interview. I didn't see it specifically.
Yeah, he did say that by calorie, the meat is the highest percentage, but I think it was something on the lines of by calorie or by energy, meat was around 55%.
We actually have estimated that in hunter-gatherers in our 2000
right here,
American Journal of Clinical Nutrition paper, and we've broken it down. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but fruit tends to be an item that hunter-gatherers like a lot, and at least the contemporary studies of hunter-gatherers by ethnographers. I can tell you there's one South American fruit that most Americans eat daily and they don't know that they're eating it. It's called Cacao theobroma.
Right. Well, the seed.
They don't, right. So what they do is the fruit itself is allowed to rot and basically ferment, and then what are left are what are called the nibs. And so we grind the nibs up, and the nibs become cocoa powder, which we make chocolate from. And that's an interesting story that I'm not going to go much further.
That's more to come in the future. But I do have
that information will come in the future.
I do have your paper pulled up here, and just to your points, you brought up nuts and seeds. Dr. Cordain did an analysis of 229 hunter-gatherer societies and lists all the plant foods they eat. So it's an N of 768. They have 317 different types of fruits that were identified, which accounts for 41.3% of the total plant food that hunter-gatherer societies eat. Nuts is 9.6%, and seeds is 7.2%, and leaves 3.6%.
So small.
Really small.
Yeah. So this is quite interesting, and I've had this conversation with a number of people recently that leaves and stems are not really eaten by hunter-gatherer tribes, and that they are probably going to favor things like fruit. And then the question, we can talk about fructose and what we think about the physiology associated with that. What's interesting about the 2000 paper, and this is just a counterpoint that I'll offer, is that I wonder how the animal to plant ratios of hunter-gatherers may have changed with marginalization. One of the things we know about current hunter-gatherer tribes is that they are shorter than their previous generations, and that there are political norms now that prevent them from hunting big animals. And so certainly in Africa, we know that the elephants are no longer hunted, and now the elephants are destroying the baobab forest. They'll go over and they'll just destroy a baobab tree. And so there's different changing landscapes because the indigenous people are not allowed to hunt giraffes and elephants and megafauna. So I wonder, when I see these plant-to-animal subsistence ratios of hunter-gatherers, if we can really infer much of our history based on what we might have done. I think my suspicion is that it was different based on latitude, and that equatorially we probably ate a lot of animals and fruit, and then as we moved northern climes, we probably ate more animals. But the ratios, I think, may be skewed, or there's a potential the ratios could be skewed by current changes, socio-political changes. The Hadza, the Ikung, these people, they can't hunt the way they used to. They can't be nomadic the way they used to. They're kind of cloistered. It's a different way of living for them now. And the megafauna have gone extinct. In the last 60,000 years, we don't have a big woolly mammoth to go hunt. So
I completely agree with you. And I just want to kind of throw in a little bit more detail about that study. So we did regressional analysis on the plant-to-animal subsistence ratio, and exactly as you predicted, as you move in latitude, what happens is plant food is replaced by more fish food. Animal food stays about the same. But the problem with so actually,
got to read here.
Okay. So the problem with ethnographic studies is they're all subjective. So somebody has got to go into the field and make some sort of non-objective impression of what they see. So we were lucky enough, after we did this paper, we did another paper, I think we published it in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition, where we rounded up the 13 objective studies of hunter-gatherer diets where they actually measured the content. So sometimes what they would do is they'd make 2 portions of the meal and the scientists would get the other portion and then do the analysis. So there's about 13 studies that have done that, and we put them all together in this paper. And they tend to agree with, you know, even though the sample size is fairly small, they tended to agree with the larger ethnographic study, which had 229 societies in it, that the average hunter-gatherer diet contained more animal food than plant food. And the ethnographic data, if you use means, it depends on the statistics that you use, but came out to be about 55% animal, 45% plant. But then you have to look at it. Those are estimates based on weight. So you got to go back and do the caloric estimate. So it's still kind of a tricky wicket. I mean, it's an imprecise way of doing things. And there are very few people that now have access to these groups. Doug London, who Trevor mentioned, is one of them. And I've known Doug for a decade or so. And he's one of the guys that has the knowledge to be able to look at what these people are eating and to be able to tell us what is and is not different.
Yeah, and this is where I have to give my little plug for Dr. London, because he's trying to get back down there to do more research. And one of the things he wants to do is the analysis of this diet. And what's really important about the hunter-gatherer society he's studying is, as you point out, there's still lots of hunter-gatherer societies out there, but most of them are not eating and living the way they lived and ate 1,000 years ago. This is one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer society that's still living where it's lived for millennia, and is still eating the way it used to eat. And that's why it's so important for him to get down there and do this research, because this opportunity to study this is disappearing.